the scientific method as the method for achieving knowledge.
Yes, I would say that this, again, the scientific method, as often discussed among flat earthers and among many elementary treatments of science, the science education, is not nearly comprehensive enough. People treat that as a comprehensive discussion and treatment of science and how it's done, and that's not the case. For instance, metrology is a major part of science, measuring properties of matter, for instance. You don't really form a hypothesis to test an experiment. You simply are measuring properties of matter, and that's very much a part of science, though it doesn't amend itself very well to the quote-unquote scientific method that's so often promulgated.
Okay. So would you be under the impression that philosophy is a science?
Well, it depends on how you define science. Today, we have appropriated the term science to apply to what we call it should be called the natural sciences. But until about 200 years ago, science referred to any kind of systematized study. History was a science. Philosophy was kind of a science. But the term was changed. You know, what we call natural science today was called natural philosophy until the 1830s.
Yeah, I post definitions all the time.
Sure. And definitions change with time. And
yeah, that's why I stick to the etymological roots and origins of the word as opposed to colloquial understandings.
And many times people will go with one definition when there might be a half a dozen definitions, and they say, see, it has to mean this. In reality, it can mean many, many other things.
Yeah, but it's about the axiom for the conversation, though.
Yeah.
So in the way that I mean, I'm referring to it in the state or fact of knowing in its original etymological sense. That's how I'm referring to it. So would you say that philosophy is the state or fact of knowing a thing?
That's tricky. I think it'd be more like a methodology used to try to get to a fact of knowing. You know, it's the approach one uses.
You're under the impression that philosophy could lead to knowledge?
Well, that's what the term term philosophy means, love of knowledge. So yeah, the two are intimately related to one another.
Technically, Sophia refers to wisdom more so than knowledge, but
okay, true enough.
In particular for supper, so I figure we're on our own.
But when I started studying philosophy a long time ago, took college and a college course on it. In the very beginning, it was explained that philosophy is a love of knowledge. Very rarely would they define it as a love of wisdom. Again, it gets slippery trying to give the different nuances to words.
Yeah, because in the sense that they're using knowledge in that statement, the love of knowledge, philosophers are not concerned with the knowledge that birds have beaks of different lengths, or the nature of the gestation period of a specific animal, or the length of 2x4s, or the maximum length of a 2x4 in the construction of a house, or any other thing of knowledge, right? That's not what philosophers are concerned about. Oftentimes they're focused on things like ontology or theory, and not actual knowledge.
Yeah, one of my colleagues at the university and later became the campus dean, he was a philosopher, and a very good one, by the way. We had a lot of interesting discussions, but when we got talking about science many times, we ended up really not agreeing too much, primarily because we were starting from two different approaches to things. Philosophers look at the world very differently the way scientists do, and vice versa. And that's a common problem. I think it's been said that scientists don't make good philosophers, and good philosophers don't make good scientists.
That sounds fair enough. And that really just illuminates the point that I'm trying to make. There are certain things that are being called science that are not actually the pursuit of knowledge. They're more so tangential, or they tease at the hope of knowledge without the actuality of knowledge. And that's how I would frame astronomy and any other theoretical bloviation, basically.
Okay, what subjects would you consider to be sciences then?
Those that use the scientific method.
And which sciences would those be?
Chemistry would be a good example of something that utilizes the scientific method, or could. Maybe not all chemists use the scientific method. However, it is within the realm of its accessibility to be using the scientific method.
Would you consider physics a science?
Sometimes, but only in regards to engineering, and not all of the time in regards to engineering, but certainly is within the realm of accessibility in regards to engineering, regarding physics. Yeah.
Okay, so you're convinced that, quote unquote, the scientific method is the only way to do science, and that is a comprehensive description of how science is done.
The only way.
Yeah, I think science fake it a little bit, because like this level of science
We just move them for the purpose of this conversation, please.
Yeah. Manaru. You're slurring your words a bit. Anyway, reluctantly, I would say yes. I'm trying to consider any other. So for instance, I wouldn't classify an archaeologist as a scientist.
And what other things would you consider not to be science?
Well, certainly astronomy, anything that has the words theoretical or the word theoretical before it. So a theoretical astrophysicist, a theoretical physicist, a theoretical anything. I don't know how many other theoretical categories there are. All of those I would classify as not science. Philosopher, I would not classify as science. Anything involving anything unnatural, anything involving things that you can't manipulate.
What do you mean by unnatural?
Supernatural, anything that involves supernaturality.
Okay, that's an important distinction. I fear that some flat earthers, certainly not all, but some, seem to think that anything synthetic, man-made, is not allowed either in science, and that's a perfect example of getting definitions hammered out. The word natural can have several meanings. When we talk about science, the proper understanding is it's not talking about supernatural things. But unfortunately, some people misunderstand that. So your attitude about quote unquote scientific method is something you're pretty convinced about, and would nothing really would change your mind.
I didn't say that.
Okay, all right. It's just that I'm concerned. I mean, I was in a
It
first
seems to
grade
me that you've
classroom.
made your mind up quite a bit, and you have some really formulated opinions, which you continually express without seeking clarification.
Wait, would you repeat that? I didn't quite catch it.
You seem to have some formulated opinions without clarifying questions or anything like that. You keep on making these statements that are quite assumptive, guilty by association or otherwise.
Well, such as I don't understand.
You keep on saying things like flat earthers this, flat earthers that.
Oh, I said I tried to qualify that by saying that some. I didn't say, and I clearly stated not by all by any means.
Mm-hmm.
So
Well, then what is its relevance? What is its relevance to this conversation then?
Well, I mean, that's the reason why you brought up the term natural, and I've seen some people, certainly not all in this discussion, misunderstand what that word natural refers to. And you and I agree on what the meaning of natural is in this context.
Maybe.
Yeah, but in the getting back to the quote-unquote scientific method, much of our education is greatly simplified at lower levels. I mean, I recall taking U.S. history 3 times growing up: 5th grade, 8th grade, and 11th grade. And you may wonder, well, why'd you have to take it 3 times? Well, each time the depth at which you studied them increased. And I get really a little put out with people today who seem to have at best, a 5th grade understanding of history, making declarations that I know are false. And there are many other subjects. In mathematics, you start off with numbers and counting and simple operations. You move on beyond that to many other things.
Okay, can I pause you there?
Yeah.
So I appreciate analogies. So you went on to mathematics and you're talking about you use numbers and you do things like adding and whatever. Do numbers stop being numbers when you move into the higher mathematics?
No. What happens is you can move on to more complex things, volumes, fractions, decimals. Then you move on eventually to working word problems, rate problems, eventually algebra, possibly trigonometry, geometry.
I understand.
And maybe beyond
I understand.
that. So I'm saying
you don't have to keep going.
Okay.
So here's the problem. You're suggesting that as you move up into the higher levels of learning, that your original axioms are no longer valid, such as the scientific method.
No, I'm getting to that. I was in a first grade class recently, and I saw on the bulletin board the scientific method with 5 steps put down. And
guys,
who's interrupting this sentence?
No, it's merchant. It's merchant.
Okay, so go ahead, Danny.
And that distressed me, because that was the same standard that I see many flat earthers promoting as being the only way that science is done. And if we do that in first grade, then we're finished. I mean, why continue on with any more science education than that? And my point is that this sort of stuff is greatly simplified to get students to think about things in a certain way. But as you move upward through your science education, hopefully things are expanded a bit. And my point is that the scientific method, quote unquote, is a very simplified treatment of how science is sometimes done, how big ideas in science are advanced. But that's not the be all that there is to science. And I think that people are taking that simple cookbook approach of just a few steps as being the only way science is done. Testing hypotheses, and there's by experiments with a independent and dependent variable. And science is a lot more murky than that. There's a lot more other ways you can do science, and it's you shouldn't be approaching science in saying that everything you learn in grade school about science, how science is done, is the only way it can be done. There's far more to it. I mentioned metrology. That's a part of it. You may want to study the properties of materials, finding specific heats, latent heats, the hardness, the electrical and thermal conductivities, all these kind of other properties. You're not testing a hypothesis. You're simply studying the natural world. You're studying the properties of matter in the natural world. That is very much a part of science as much as testing hypotheses with controlled experiments. And that's my objection, is that people want to say science can only be done this way. They're treating a very elementary, basic definition of how science is done as being exhaustive and comprehensive, and it's not.
Is there room for sophistry to be part of science?
What do you mean?
Sophistry?
No, I don't know what you're getting at. So
is sophistry science?
I don't understand the question.
That's okay. I'll post a definition in the chat for clarifying meaning. Is specious but fallacious reasoning science?
Well, that's not supposed to be. I'm not saying that scientists are never guilty of improper reasoning, but no, it's not supposed to be.
I would agree with you. And I am under the impression and have seen lots of evidence that people who call themselves scientists have certain presuppositions and or assumptions about reality that influence everything that they say and do and pervert their results and their claims. And as a result, the things that they're teaching others under the guise of science results in miseducation and lies.
Well, I think maybe you're getting down to bias, which everybody has. If you're thinking about a certain way and you have that bias and it's the wrong way, you're going to tend to ignore or minimize data that run contrary to that. And I've run into numerous examples of people doing that. Something doesn't fit what they expect, and so they think it's an outlier. They don't think it's significant. And many times some of the most interesting things in science can happen in those outliers because it's kind of things that people aren't looking at.
So Danny, would you be a 6,000 year guy or something else?
I'm a recent creationist.
Okay, 6 days.
By the way, I see that Paula is in here, by the way.
Yeah.
This morning.
Oh,
Just so I could know about you, I was just curious. You are a 6-day guy?
Yes.
Good. Well, I'm glad to hear that.
Yeah, that makes me a bit different from most other scientists. I must say my own.
Sure does. The reason I asked that question is more so about how you allow for the justification. Like it sounds like to me that you think that a lot of things that I wouldn't consider science, you think they are, and I just am curious about how aware you are of like the pervasive deception.
You're talking about commitment to naturalistic origins?
Not just that, and that's an irony in and of itself, in regards to the rejection of the ontological primitive and all of that. But I'm just referring to the deceptions in regards to radiocarbon dating, the evolutionary narrative, the Kabbalistic and ancient mystery school religion influences on quote unquote science and the way that they describe, especially in the realm of astronomy and astrophysicists. It's all influenced from an originating narrative that dates back to the mystery schools of Babylon. And I cannot understand how one would turn a blind eye as they learn more and more about it to recognize that fact.
I think part of the problem is that the major part of the problem is that we use the word science in two different ways. We creationists like to talk about operational or experimental observational science, the science of here and now, what you can test in the here and now. The Earth's shape is certainly something that we can test as the world now exists. The other way that people use it is what's called historical or origin science, where people talk about what may have happened in the past, and you cannot test that the same way that you do in the here and now. You can look at, say, fossils and make some conjectures about how they formed, when they formed, all those sorts of things. But you can't say for certain it's exactly what happened, because you can't go back and observe it. You can't go back and experiment upon it. So that's a shift that started occurring in science among scientists in the 19th century, and that shift is pretty well complete by now. When we creationists mention this two different ways of thinking about science, most other scientists today don't even understand that. They can't comprehend. They see no difference between those two.
Let me ask you this. Are you concerned by the narratives within the realm of quantum as a category of discussion?
Are you talking about quantum mechanics?
Quantum anything.
Well, quantum just simply means a quantized amount of something.
I'm not getting into that fractal. I'm talking about quantum as a category of conversation within the context of what is referred to as science.
I don't know what you mean by that.
Yeah.
I don't think I've heard that term used that way.
Okay. So sure, for the sake of the conversation, quantum physics, sure. Are you concerned by certain narratives that are associated with the concept of quantum physics?
Well, I think maybe you're getting to interpretations, quote unquote, of quantum mechanics, such as the Copenhagen interpretations or the multi-world interpretation that you're talking about.
I'm speaking in a very general way.
Okay.
Is there anything about that category of topic that concerns you?
Well, quantum mechanics itself is a well-formulated and well-tested model of physics. It's got a tremendous amount.
It's a direct question that should have a direct answer.
Well, I guess I'm not understanding your question at all. I'm saying that the quantum mechanics itself is a well-tested science with a lot of experimental evidence.
So if I were to ask you, in the realm of automobile manufacturing, is there anything that concerns you? And let's say this was your field of expertise. I would expect a person to be like, well, yes, absolutely. In regards to fuel efficiency, in regards to these safety mechanisms, in regards to these things, I have some concerns, right? That's kind of what I'm asking for. So in the large spectrum or field of study of quantum things or quantum physics, have you any concerns?
I have concerns, tremendous concerns, with the philosophical interpretation that many physicists have put onto it. That's my point I was trying to get to. The most common interpretation, if you will, of quantum mechanics today is what's called the Copenhagen interpretation. And I have, for a very long time, said that the Copenhagen interpretation is a stupid answer to a stupid question. It's an attempt to do philosophy, and they're particularly poor at doing it. The physics is okay. The philosophy that people are trying to ascribe to it are really bad. And I think what you're getting to here is that many physicists and other people too, non-physicists who have talked about it, get into some Oriental mysticism. Somebody wrote a book a number of years ago, The Tao of Modern Physics. And, Robert Oppenheimer was fond of quoting for the Upanishads. So there's a lot of mysticism that's being imported or re-imported back into quantum mechanics today, and that concerns me greatly.
No, thank you for answering that question. I'm going to hand it over to Level Up.
Oh, surprise.
I'm glad to hear you. Glad to talk to
Same
you.
here. Yeah, we had a nice conversation before, kind of an introductory get-to-know-you sort of thing, I think.
Yep.
Yeah, I kind of was distracted
by the way, I like your attitude. Who was I just talking to?
Gospel bearer.
Okay, well, I appreciate your attitude too. It really is. So many times, flat earthers and globe earthers get together, and it's a shouting match, and I'm not interested in that at all. I don't want to play gotcha. I want to talk with people, and if people don't want to talk, they just want to argue, then count me out. So I appreciate both of you. You have great attitudes.
Understood.
You've been around for a
Thank
while,
you.
Danny. Have you just recently come back, or what?
I came on this channel a
Couple of
year or
years
two
ago.
ago. I can't remember what it was. Yeah, and after a half an hour, I was booted out, so I didn't feel like I was welcome. I turn on the YouTube channel from time to time. I'll have it in the background listening when I'm doing something that I don't have to give my full attention to. So if something comes up that interests me, then I'll turn it up and listen to it for a while. But I recently came back because basically I was asked to talk to Paula, and as long as I have time, and as long as the discussion is civil, I'm happy to be here and answer questions and talk with people and interact. I don't want to get in an argument, a bunch of gotcha and shouting matches though. And by the way, the mean stuff comes from both sides. Neither sides, their hands are clean on this. I get put out with people on both sides who can't behave themselves.
Right. I was just going to say, years ago when I was still on Faceplant, I call it, I mentioned Dr. Michael Heiser. I forget who was running the Facebook page at the moment, but I think it was either Answers in Genesis or Creation Research Institution or whatever they call it. I forget. But they jumped down my throat about Heiser, like, oh, I beat that guy in a debate and blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, whoa, I think I'll just leave. I just don't stick around when it's like that. So, and my point with Heiser, I mean, I'm sure you're familiar with him, is
Yes.
that his area of expertise is linguistic, right? It's not theology, it's not even science, it's linguistics. And I thought he made a fair point in saying that there's a lack of consistency in how Christians approach Genesis 1 as historical narrative, which I think both of us agree that that's what it is, historical narrative, even though they use, the ancient Near East historical practice was to use figures of speech and other embellishments, I guess you could say, to put the reader into the story without saying it's fiction. That's the point that is hard for a lot of modern Western minds to grasp, is that if you say something with more color than just a dry technical prose, then somehow it's not to be believed, and that's not true at all. But
Yeah.
the point that Heiser made that I thought was fair was the lack of consistency in that how can it be that we take the time statements in Genesis 1 literally, but not the structure statements? They're both in the same context, they're both in the same narrative, and yet, we take evening and morning day 1, evening and morning day 2 is very clearly, I don't know how they could make it any more clear that these are literal solar days. And yet when the Bible says that the earth is fixed, it's never, and here I would say, you could say this is an argument from silence, but it's a very big silence. The Bible, in whatever genre, whatever context, never describes the earth as moving, spinning, orbiting, and I've brought up before about the fact that there was nothing for the earth to orbit until the sun was made on day 4. So these are the things that I see as inconsistencies and inexplicable, that we can take, like I said, the time statements literally, but not the structure. Would you like to comment on that?
Well, you're right. The Bible doesn't, Genesis account of creation particularly doesn't talk about the earth's shape or the earth moving around the sun. But it's kind of an argument from silence to say that since it doesn't mention the globe earth, the earth must not be a globe. In our last discussion, I think I pointed out that there's ambiguity in the cosmology of Genesis. The cosmogony is clear enough, but the cosmology is a bit vague.
Right, but what I was saying is that why I included the words any genre, any narrative,
Yeah.
meaning any place in the Bible. Whenever the Bible does talk about the earth, it talks about it like for example, when we do with earth age, we can point to the Ten Commandments and it says, "For in 6 days God made heaven and earth, and the seventh day you rest." He wasn't talking about long ages, obviously. So that is an indirect statement outside of Genesis, but in a totally different context. But it's appealing to the literal context of Genesis in making the statement, the argument for resting on the seventh day for Israel. In the same way, I can look at other contexts in the Bible where, especially there are many statements in Job and other places in the Psalms about the waters above the heavens that are still apparently there. Granted, it doesn't say a lot about the structure of the cosmos, but it also doesn't really say a lot about the days, for that matter. They're both, I would say the Bible says more about the structure than it does about the time. So what I'm saying is, whenever the Bible describes Earth, there is no instance where it talks about it moving, spinning, orbiting, or anything like that. Every instance of talking about creation is about the stars, the sun, moon, and stars moving over the earth being fixed and shall not move. And then there's, as I mentioned before, the long day of Joshua. Everything the Bible says about the structure, wherever it says it, is from a stationary perspective. Again, this doesn't say the shape, right? We've agreed that there's a geocentrism that holds that the Earth is still a ball, but that everything revolves around it. So it's still not a shape statement, but I think it is significant that the Bible, in every instance, talks about the Earth as a stationary thing. Would you be able to agree with that statement about it being stationary?
Not really. I mean, some of the, and again, this is getting into geocentrism as opposed to Earth shape. So, as long as you understand, we're swerving off a little bit. I agree. I appreciate your clarification. But some of the statements that geocentrists use from Scripture, like the Earth shall not be moved, some other translations say shaken. And the same Hebrew word is used by David. He refers to himself, "I shall not be moved," and people clearly understand it's not talking about him sitting in one place and never moving from that place. He's talking about being shaken or moved from his fixed position in a less literal way. His faith is not going to be shaken or moved. I think that's what it says about the Bible, talking about the earth as well. It's not talking about it literal motion through space. It's talking about it's established to do what it is, and it's not going to be shaken from that purpose that it has. That's how I understand those passages. As far as
Right, but, go ahead.
I was going to say, as far as Joshua's long day, if I'm correct in my cosmology, then it required the Earth to stop spinning for a while. And sometimes people will say, well, that would cause everybody to momentum would cause them to keep spinning. Well, you stop the momentum of the Earth. Why would God not stop the momentum of people on the Earth as well? I mean, if you're going to do one, the other, it's kind of a match set. It's kind of silly to suggest that God would overlook that one part. That's my understanding of the miracle that happened there, because it was a miracle.
Okay, I would consider that, though, I just lost the name of the fallacy I was going to name, ad hoc, because we're assuming something that isn't stated. So
Sure.
at the very least, we can say that both sides of the argument are going to use some kind of ad hoc fallacy or begging the question in some way.
Yeah.
So I think what we would be better off doing is dealing with geocentrism first before we deal with the shape. Because I know I'm going to post a link to an article I saw a few days ago where, oh man, I mistyped that. Sorry, let me try that again. Okay, there was an extra parenthesis, but this is one that somebody wrote in response to statements you had made about geocentrism. And I noticed I watched the interview that you were interviewed by MC Toon a while back around the 31-minute mark, you said that you believe this was possible, that geocentrism could be true. And this was the view of Sir Fred Hoyle in 1975, where, and here I'll quote that as well, because it's easier than, everybody will want to see that, where he said, "We know the difference between a heliocentric theory and a geocentric theory is one of relative motion only, and that such a difference has no physical significance." Now, in the article, though, it seemed that you were adamant against geocentrism. Is that true, or what is your current position on geocentrism? Is it possible?
Boy, you're opening up not a can of worms, but a 55-gallon drum of, motion is an extremely tricky thing. It gets more into philosophy than it does into physics. All we can ever observe, measure, or experience is relative motion. We never actually can observe, experience, or measure absolute motion. And that's the tricky thing that we have to deal with. And Mach's principle is this thing that Ernst Mach came up with probably in the 1880s, I'm going to guess. Mm-hmm. It's a philosophical position that people have, and physicists actually have worked out systems where you could have a geocentric Earth with either the Earth not rotating at all or rotating and not revolving. You've got several possibilities there, and it's possible to work out a system whereby all of that comes together. A lot of people don't know that. A lot of people know a lot about physics, don't know this either. And when I talk about, Joshua's long day, for instance, I say, since motion is such a tricky thing in a very real sense, the sun moves across the sky every day. I understand that that's caused by the rotation of the Earth, but in a very real sense, the sun moves because what's moving and what's not. And again, this is getting away from physics. This is pretty deep into philosophy at this point. And so it's a really tricky thing. I'm sure most people listening, probably you have too, have been fooled by motion. I've been fooled thinking I was moving in an elevator when I wasn't, thinking that I was sitting at a parking lot, not in a parking lot, at a traffic light, and the car next to me kind of moves a little bit, and I'm distracted, and I'm thinking I'm moving when actually it's the car next to me. And also when I've been sitting at a gate, busy reading or something, a gate of an airport, and something next to me starts to move, and I think that the plane I'm in is being backed away from the gate. In reality, it isn't. So those are all three examples I've experienced where I thought I was experiencing emotion when I was not. And that's what we come back here. Yeah, somebody just posted the vestibular system on the chat here, the live stream. But the vestibular system doesn't detect motion. That was something I was taught growing up, that it detects motion. It doesn't. It detects acceleration. Big difference. And we are able to detect acceleration pretty easily. We're not very good at detecting velocity. All we can do with velocity is measure that relative motion with respect to something else. So if you're a geocentrist, what is, you got to basically define what is not moving. And if one wants to, for the sake of argument, define that the Earth is not moving, then that's fine. We do that frequently in astronomy, believe it or not, and in physics, even though we understand the Earth is moving.
How, Danny? How? How do you understand it?
Hold on, please.
Yeah, it's a convenient. We're on a platform, observing platform. We look at the sky around us. We can actually treat the Earth as a stationary system of reference. Doesn't mean that it is, and that something means we can treat it. And people might think I'm doing double talk here, but that gets into the complexity of this whole thing. It's not as simple as most people want to think it is.
Right. But would you say we could agree then that the motion of things in the sky can't tell us anything about whether there's geocentrism or the shape of the Earth?
Simply looking at the motion of the things in the sky, we can't determine whether the Earth is moving or not. So it's a bit more complicated. And then there's evidence that the Earth is moving, but again, it gets back into the very depths of Mach's principle and how you interpret these things. The shape of the
Right.
earth is something we generally do or talk about, not in the context of the motion of celestial objects.
Right. And so the whole point is that unless we get deep into somebody's esoteric knowledge, and there's no other word for it really, because we're essentially treating quote unquote scientists as some kind of priesthood, that in the sense that they have knowledge we don't have, and we just have to trust them. And this gets into compartmentalization as well, because each discipline has its own bubble that it's in, and it trusts all the other disciplines to have everything right in order to form a comprehensive picture. So that, someone may be an expert in one thing, but not an expert in another, just like I mentioned with Michael Heiser. He's a linguist, not a theologian or a scientist. And so I think he makes some grave theological errors, for example, and he believes in evolution, he believes, in all the standard things, and yet is a Christian, as far as I can tell. And I'm not going to judge his salvation on the basis of this, but I think he has his own inconsistencies, such as that if the Bible is what he calls, quote unquote, theological messaging in Genesis, then how does he say that Jesus literally rose from the dead, since it defies science? It isn't consistent on his part. But at the same time, on this overall question of relative motions and how much detailed, quote unquote, hidden knowledge to most people that we must rely upon in order to understand God's creation, because as it says in Romans 1, that there is no excuse, that people are without excuse for knowing there's a God, because they can just look at creation and see it. And yet we're told now that because of deep scientific, sometimes esoteric knowledge, that we can't understand, we just have to trust. And we're having a major problem with that in this venue, as far as things that we know we've been lied to about, and not just about earth shape. There are all sorts of deceptions going on, and this was, of course, what Jesus warned about, the end times, that just, see to it that you're not deceived. It was the first thing he said when he was asked about the end times. So I do agree that some people have gone overboard with that and thrown everything out as a lie, that absolutely everything, including the Bible and, history and all sorts of things, are all a lie. I don't go to that extreme. But what I'm saying is that if we cannot answer the question of whether the sun or the earth is the center, or the shape of the earth, without going into near philosophy or deep esoteric knowledge, scientific knowledge in this case, then I think we have a major problem with, like, for example, as far as what the point I'm going to try to make now, it has to do with how much precision we expect from the Bible. I was just in a conversation in another server about this ridiculous claim that God doesn't know pi, the value of pi, because when he told them how to make these various vessels for the temple, that he would say it's like 30 cubits to 10 cubits, and this is only 3-to-1, not 3.14159. Therefore, and I asked them, I say, do you mean to tell me there's a little notch in the rim where those missing 0.1 digits are? What are they expecting from the Bible when they read it? But context is everything, and I think that in the overall context of the Bible, that we shouldn't need that much precision in order to understand where we live. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay, cool. So what I'm hearing so far is that there's no slam dunk against a flat stationary Earth.
No, I would disagree with that.
Okay, on what basis?
Well, first of all, we need to we started talking about geocentrism, so we need to separate out the flat part. If we want to talk about the shape
Right.
of the Earth, we can treat that. There are several lines of evidence that the Earth does move around the sun. That's, you can reinterpret each of those in terms of a stationary Earth using certain versions of Mach's principle and a few add-ons to it. This gets back to what Hoyle was talking about, and a few others were talking about, how you can construct a geocentric world. These things do require explanation. I don't see how these would work in the zetetic model that most flat earthers believe today. It would work, possibly could work in a globe geocentric world, and we could talk about the zetetic model a bit later because it's very different from other usual forms, or the most common form prior, of geocentrism. The arguments that I would give for motion of the Earth around the sun would be aberration of starlight, parallax of stars, and periodic Doppler motions in spectra of stars. And also in my own work, I've done eclipsing binary star research for about 45 years, and we see in the timings of these eclipses periodic shifts with an amplitude of 8 minutes, dealing which is easily interpreted in terms of the Earth orbiting the sun. Now, if you want to argue geocentrism, then you could have the entire universe orbiting around the Earth once a year. That would be the way that geocentrists would answer that objection. So you could reinterpret all of those 4 lines of evidence I just gave for the Earth orbiting the sun. It gets very complicated, and again, bit ad hoc to do that, but it can be done.
Yeah. So now, are you an atheist?
No, far from it.
Okay, so you're a guy. So you believe in the Bible, the Christian Bible, and Jesus.
Yeah,
Okay, so how do you explain when God held the sun and the moon for Joshua to continue slaughtering the Philistines?
We've already been on that. We've been already over that.
That's fine, but still, I'd like to know, because how are you going to give a geocentric? So you're saying he stopped the entire universe for this one event?
Well, if you're a more traditional geocentrist, globe Earth geocentrist, then the universe basically had to stop. If you
the entire universe would have had to stop for him to do that. And so, considering we are the only beings that are fallen, that means he would have to stop the order for every other life forms that he's created throughout the universe. And
I don't believe in ETs.
Then that just all that does is bring up speculation and conjecture, because you can't prove any of that. So
well, the thing is that when it comes to what the Bible said stopped, it only said the sun and the moon. It didn't say all the stars and everything else.
Exactly. So that's why I'm curious as to what his belief system is, because if you take the word as literal,
we've been over that though.
Yeah, that's
fine.
fine.
If you could check the chat.
All right, my bad then. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, sorry. But I think what I'm trying to find is the point that whether it's geocentric or not really depends on what one thinks is a preponderance of evidence. And what I'm hearing so far, not just from you, Dr. Faulkner, but anybody, is that there is no hard and fast, like I said, a slam dunk against geocentrism versus heliocentrism. But you said something about parallax I'd like to comment on. If we use the Earth's position difference on each 6 months, right, to do parallax of some distant object, which requires, of course, the assumption that it's a distant object, we would take the Earth where it is 6 months apart and get a fair distance for something we've assumed is far away. How can this work for something like Polaris, for example, since it doesn't move very far? We agree that it moves, right, in a tiny circle. But how can we, if that's something that the Earth, that the central point of the circle of the stars overhead is at Polaris, that this is because of Earth spinning on its axis. Well, its axis has moved significantly over the period of 6 months. And if it's also being dragged by the sun, the Earth is being, and kind of corkscrewing behind the sun through space, how can we compare of any heavenly object 6 months apart, comparing the angles when everything is moving all the time in relation to each other? Could you comment on that?
Are you talking about relationship to each other, or are you talking about just the Earth's motions, rotation, revolution?
Well, I'm saying that since we observe that the stars in the sky revolve mainly around Polaris, and since we use Earth position 6 months apart to parallax to determine the distance to things in the sky, how is that possible when, given all the Earth's motions, that's not only its spin, but also its difference in position relation to the things we're looking at in the sky over a period of 6 months?
It's because the stars are incredibly far away. You brought up Polaris. It's 30 million times farther away than the sun is from the Earth.
How do we know that?
It's based upon the parallax we measure.
But that sounds like circular reasoning to me. I mean, we're saying that we're determining parallax for an object that we've already decided is very far away.
Right, and the thing about parallax is the farther away it is, the less the parallax will be. I mean, this is something that anyone can test for themselves. The way I would do it is to have people hold their thumb up at arm's length and look at it with one eye and then the other, and you will see a definite shift. Hold on, let me turn that off. You will see a definite shift in position. And if you have someone stand 10 or 20 feet away and hold their thumb up and you look at it, the shift will be quite a bit less. And this process has been used on the Earth for a very long time. If a surveyor wants to determine the distance to a very distant object, he doesn't have to take a chain and go end to end with it through the woods and so forth. You can set up a baseline with either two theodolites or one that moves from point A to point B. And from the baseline and the difference in the angle that he measures, you get a very long, skinny triangle. Knowing the base is, you apply basic trigonometry, and you get that distance. So this, when we jump up into the sky looking at stars, it's not an untried or untested sort of method. It's something we've been using for centuries, maybe even longer, to survey on the Earth. And we can do the same thing in the sky. And the Greeks knew that if the Earth were moving around the sun, which they greatly discussed, it turns out, there should be observable parallax. They didn't find any, so they concluded, being good scientists, by the way, they concluded that the Earth did not move. There were a few people then who suggested, Aristarchus is one, who suggested that the Earth did move, and the only way he could explain that was if the stars were very far away. Now, it wasn't until about 180 years ago that they found the first parallax. Today, it's improved tremendously with the increase of technology. But the parallaxes we do observe are consistent with the Earth moving around the sun. That leaves us with just two possibilities. Either, if you unless you reject parallax measurements altogether, but if I think they're real, then that either the Earth is moving around the sun, or once a year, or the entire universe is moving around the Earth once a year.
A number of points. I'd like to address in that. First of all, when you do triangulation in trigonometry, you're doing triangles, and they must have three flat sides. So if we're going to do any kind of distance measurement, we must assume that we're standing on something flat. It's impossible to get a 90-degree angle from a curved surface if the Earth were curved. The other thing is, again, the assumption that the stars are large and far away. That's an assumption, and I don't think that parallax disproves any other possibility that we must be moving, and instead of the universe, the things in the sky moving. I don't think that's a valid argument to rule out that we are standing still and everything else is moving. So as in any scientific theory, you can't just say, well, I have a story that I think makes sense of all the data, therefore it must be true. We have to falsify it. We have to be able to say that nothing else can explain these phenomena. And what I think I hear you saying is that, yes, you could say that we're standing on something flat and stationary, and the stars could be small and nearby and have their own motions that don't have to be explained by parallax. And then where are we? Because at the end of the day, each side has some certain, we look at the same data just like we do in young and old Earth creationism. We'll look at the same data and reach different conclusions. But when it comes to, 1 minute, let me shut the clock.
I was hoping that was not a sound effect somebody was putting to describe me.
No, it's my little clock I got back in high school when I went to Germany, and it's a authentic Black Forest cuckoo clock that I got in Munich.
It's held up well, hasn't it?
Yeah, it sat in a box for many years after it stopped working for a while, but recently my husband got it out and fixed it up and ordered some parts, and now it works again. To everyone else's annoyance. So anyway, but again, just to summarize the points that I was trying to make is that everything is based on first assuming, in the standard cosmology model, everything is assuming that stars are very large and very, very far away, that parallax from us moving is the only explanation, and that because we have a model that works in the standard model, then other models are probably not true.
Okay. Do I gather from what you're saying that you would accept the reality of at least some parallax measurements?
I know what parallax is. I mean, it is used on Earth all the time, like you said, but it requires
stellar parallax.
I'm sorry, stellar parallax?
Yeah.
I'm saying we observe that the stars have some kind of regular positional changes, but they can also be explained by the stars simply having that in their motion, not necessarily that we have moved and that there's parallax. We have no non-moving reference frame to go by.
Paula, I'm happy to hear you say that, because I haven't met a flat earther yet who would agree that stellar parallax measurements have actually been made. Most of them just simply deny the measurements, saying that they're made up. I don't know. So I'm encouraged that there are probably others I've not talked to, but it's encouraging to find that you would accept it, and I would encourage your others to try to work out the details. As I said, you can use alternative hypotheses to explain things in science, and then you can make further predictions based upon your hypothesis to test that sort of thing. So that's a way to do science, it turns out. So I'm finding out we're agreeing on, we disagree on some issues, but we agree on others. So I would be curious to learn if other flat earthers would at least accept the possibility that parallax measurements are real.
Yeah, and all I would clarify on that is I wouldn't necessarily call it parallax, because parallax assumes that you're doing the moving. Where I would say instead is that we see variations in star position that, I would just quibble about the term parallax.
Fair enough. I understand.
Yeah, and I have a number of videos. I think I mentioned before, I have a playlist on my channel called Challenging Standard Cosmology. And I did some studies. I use my own camera, my own observations, and sometimes I would compare them with dateandtime.com just to make sure that, I don't agree with people who say that that data there is made up, because it matches at least where I am on my latitude and longitude. It measures, I observe the sun and moon doing what they're supposed to do when they're supposed to do it. And so I'm not quibbling about that. But in one of my videos, the one on the sun, I showed very near the beginning that the daily motion of the sun is a puzzle, because we know physically the sun never is 90 degrees overhead outside of the tropics. It goes around basically the equator, only goes a certain distance north and south through its seasons. And so how do we then explain, for example, here in the northern hemisphere, if I look south and I watch the sun's motion over the course of the summer, I'll see that it rises northeast, especially, let's take the two extremes of the solstices. In the summer solstice in the north, looking south, the sun is rising in the northeast and setting in the northwest, okay? It goes in an arc overhead. It's not a straight line because I'm not in the tropics. But at the same time, on the same day, someone in Australia looking north will see the sun rise in the southeast and set in the southwest, which means that this motion of the sun is kind of pinching toward the center at the equator as it goes through its daily motion overhead. So there's
are you talking? Wait just a second. Are you talking about in winter? I mean, summer here in the northern hemisphere?
Yeah, or any given day. I'm just using the solstice as an extreme point of the sun's.
But when we in our summer, or what's going on now, we see the sun rise in the northeast, set in the northwest, and people in Australia, for instance, would see the same thing. The sun would still rise in the northeast and set in the northwest.
But that's not what I saw on date and time. I looked up the same day for a place in the United States and a place in Australia, and on the same day. I'm sorry?
What date was that?
I don't remember. It was a couple of years ago, but I would have to. I would have to look up my images. Right. That might take some time. I don't want to do that right now. But if anybody can go to my channel and find, well, let me see. I might be able to find a link real quick that somebody could get an image off of there.
I think you might be thinking of the summer solstice in the north versus the summer solstice in the south, which is 6 months.
Yes, that's the problem. If it's the same date, then they're going to be rising and setting in the same general direction. But when you switch between, say, summer solstice in the northern hemisphere and summer solstice in the southern hemisphere, then it's southeast, southwest for them, northeast, northwest for us. But when we're seeing it on the same date, we basically agree, north and south, that the sun is rising and setting in the same positions.
The thing is, I used the same date when I did that. I posted my video, but somewhere not very far from the beginning is a part where I show on the same date in dateandtime.com that the sun's motion overhead is, whether if you're looking south, it's going, from the northeast to northwest. If you're looking north from Australia, say, it's going south to southwest. So the motion of the sun, if you were to stack them one over the other like I did in the video, they're pinching toward each other toward the equator. And this raises serious questions about how we observe the luminaries.
Why don't you recheck on what you did and get back to me on that? I'd like to look into it.
Yeah, it's the video's right there in the live stream voice text, and there's the images. Great, Gospel Bearer's got them. Those are the two. You can see the data in the image there. Let me see it, blow that up so I can read it myself because it's kind of blurry. But it was
today at 10:07 a.m. Is that the one?
Yes, on the yeah, right there. So let's see.
I can't read it very well either.
Yeah, it's a little blurry. Sorry.
Is that for today's date?
No, this was several years ago.
Okay. I can't quite make it out.
Yeah, sorry about that. I can try to get a clearer version of that. Oh, there's the date is 2018-02. It's in the drop-down boxes. 2018 February 8th. And then the other, so they're both 2018 February 8th.
Okay, I would suggest using a date closer to the solstices than that. You're actually closer to the equinoxes there, and then there's a latitude dependence that comes in, so be careful.
Well, even on the equinoxes, they would be more flattened out and less obviously curved, right?
Yep. Well,
so,
the sun rises due east and sets due west only on the equinoxes, and it departs from that. It's probably better to look at the extremes than it is to look at the...
Which, like I'm saying, this is February, right? That I did this in February, which isn't... I mean, it's a little past the winter solstice, but we still have enough curve to see the difference, that they're pinching toward the equator.
I can't make out on the diagram what it's saying. It's just the resolution is not good enough. So,
It's in the video, though.
If you could send that to me, the link on the video, I'll be happy to look at it later.
Yeah, I can DM you that too as well if you want. let me just do that because things will roll off the page here. So let me go ahead and send you that. If I can just find your name on my list, there you are. But yeah, the point is that it's on the same day, right? So how can the sun be moving north and south at the same time on the same day? That's the question. I think this would apply to anything we observe in the heavens. If it applies to something obvious like the sun, it's going to apply to pretty much everything in the sky, I would think.
If you could send that to me, I'll look at it and I'll get back to you sometime. Maybe not right away, but I'll get back to you.
Right. It's sent to you in your direct messages.
Okay.
So other than that, we can put that aside for the time being until you get a chance to watch it. But I think what I'm trying to get at just for today, because I know you can't always stay a long time, is that so far I haven't heard any, like I hate to overuse the term slam dunk, against the Earth being stationary, against geocentrism, and we haven't even really talked about the shape.
Yeah, and again, the problem with trying to establish geocentrism or geokineticism is the thing you went the heart of immediately by quoting Hoyle on this, and as I agreed, many people study physics don't. It took me a long while to come to grips with this, but motion is an incredibly subtle, complex thing that so many people think that, well, some things move and some things don't, and it's not like that at all. Determining what is actually not moving and what is moving, that is more of a philosophical question than it is a scientific one, as it turns out. I will say this, though, I took on the geocentrist over 2 decades ago, the modern geocentrist before the flat Earth movement came about in this century, and one of the major proponents of that is he has a PhD in astronomy, believe it or not. He started off in his book by saying that it was a philosophical question, not a scientific one, but he ended his book by claiming scientific evidence that the Earth isn't moving. I thought, well, that's not very consistent. If it's a philosophical question, then why are you trying to argue scientifically? So he was arguing out of both sides of his mouth on that one. I never did figure that one out.
I think pretty much everyone does, which is, when it comes to trying to determine what we're standing on by looking at everything else is such a problem. It's like you said, it becomes philosophical, it becomes subjective, and that's why we don't consider, generally speaking, that any discussion of what's going on in the sky is ever going to really tell us what we're standing on. So that's why we tend to try to keep bringing it back to what we can observe with our own eyes on the Earth and not get into this philosophy if we can help it.
Yeah.
So sometime, I'm sure you probably got other things to do. I did watch your interview on MC Tune on March the 12th. And there are a number of notes I took that maybe we can talk about sometime.
Sure, be happy to. Yeah, I probably will have to leave, perhaps abruptly at some point. I'm expecting somebody to come by my office here soon, so I can't stay here forever.
Right.
But we can keep chatting for a little while if you'd like.
Okay.
Or we can defer chatting till later. That's fine. I'm a patient man.
Well, whichever you want to do.
A lot of people are excited to hear what he has to say about the surface of Earth instead of up in the stars.
Right. Which is none of our area of expertise, which is good.
Well, I think the comments that I've seen there are asking the question many flat earthers ask about why are you looking up in the sky to determine the shape of the Earth? Is that basically the direction this is going for people?
Yeah.
Yeah. And I don't know, I hear flat earthers say that so often that it's sort of like a mantra that they've all convinced themselves up. But the fact of the matter is, if the Earth is flat, then when you look at heavenly bodies, particularly as you move around on the surface of the Earth, what you're going to see is going to be different than when you move around on a globe.
If Earth is globe, there will be curvature there. Start always if Earth is globe, and then you will come somewhere.
Yeah, Danny, we can turn that around, right? We hear globers saying, "Well, look at the sky, look at the sky. Earth is a ball." It's becoming a mantra, right?
Perhaps. I mean,
Okay, then
I
it's not
do
fair
feel the
to say
things in the
something.
sky, but apparently people are just dismissing it, saying, well, we don't need to look up in the sky because why would you do that? It seems to be the question. I don't think many flat earthers are taking what I'm saying about this very seriously.
Well, yeah. Well, what we want is you to just explain the surface part, if you can, to the best of your ability, and go from there.
Okay. How the evidence I'm talking about for the Earth being a globe?
Yes,
Yeah.
concerned with the
Okay.
surface. Yes, yeah.
All right. I explained with Paula last Saturday or recently, whenever it was, that I had recently, just 2 days before, come back from a trip to Florida. I was in South Florida, and I observed the star Canopus about the time it was on the celestial meridian, which means it's about as
Here's
high
why
as.
everybody gets annoyed with this conversation. I'm cutting you off. I know that's kind of rude, but when people talk about the surface, they don't mean stars.
Well, I don't understand your point.
Stars aren't on the ground.
Sure.
Unless you're referring to like a reflection in the water, but that's not what people are talking about. When they say surface of the earth, they're talking about what's down here, not what's up in the sky. So if you start talking about stars, people are going to get really frustrated with you.
Because you're asking the question, why are you looking up in the sky when you're talking about the shape of the Earth's surface? And I already explained, because the Earth's shape will dictate how we see the positions of objects in the sky as we move around on the Earth.
Why?
And hence, it's a good test between the two.
Why?
So what if it's
Why
a
must
cloudy
that
day?
be?
Well,
Why must that be the case?
I was explaining that when you interrupted me.
Okay, but pay very close attention to the specific words in my question. Why must that be the case?
Geometry dictates it.
Yes, what if the geometry is of what's up above us and how we view it from different locations, as opposed to some type of curvature of the actual Earth?
Are you saying that geometry works differently in the heavens above us?
What I'm saying, Danny, is what if the firmament itself conveys in a certain way? What if that is the explanation for why we see stuff the way we see it from where we are?
It seems rather ad hoc to me.
It can seem that way, but that's only because you start with the presupposition that Earth is a ball. So when you
I'm not I'm not doing that. I'm simply, as I said, if the Earth is flat and we have stars above us, be they on the dome, whatever, as you move around on the Earth, they will appear in different parts of the sky, and you can make some predictions about what you would expect those changes in position to be. If the Earth is a globe, then as you move around on the Earth, you will see changes in positions of stars in the sky, and those predictions will be very different from what you would expect if the Earth is flat. So it amounts to a crucial test between the two different propositions.
Yeah, and those expectations may be false.
You're saying that you can't make predictions?
I didn't say those words. I said those expectations may be false, and what I mean by that is that expectation that you have of what you think things would be if the surface were flat, those expectations may be false.
How so?
As I mentioned, how the firmament behaves could be the explanation.
And how are you proposing the firmament behaves?
However it is observed.
Well, that's a circular argument then, isn't it?
So is the globe. That's my point. Listen, man, there's circular reasoning with the globe arguments. No less so than me saying we're on a flat surface, we look up, the stars are within the substrate and or medium of the firmament, as is written in the book you claim to believe in. Okay, it says that it's within the firmament substance. Okay, so however that appears to us, how we see things from wherever they are and wherever we are, is what it is. So you can call it ad hoc, but the problem is there's no alternative away from ad hoc. We see what we see. So we have to stop looking at the sky as a result of both explanations hypothetically being ad hoc. We have to look at the ground. So that's why I pointed you away from talking about the stars as your quote unquote reasonable explanation and pointing back to the ground or the surface.
Then we have a fundamental disagreement that would prohibit any further meaningful discussion on this topic between the two of us.
Correct. That's correct. If you don't leave an opportunity for God's word being literal and there being a firmament and the stars being within it, then yeah, I mean it would be hard to come to some type of consensus. But I've had this conversation with atheists who don't believe any of the words of the Bible, and the same thing is the result. You're having certain assumptions about how you think it would be if it were flat, how you think it would be, as opposed to it is what we observe what it is. We observe what it is. Now, what it is and how we describe it needs to come from something else besides the presuppositions. Which is why we talk about the surface and not something else, because the question is about the surface.
No, nobody's talking level up.
Yeah.
Okay, thanks. I was having other audio problems. 'Cause every time Skype starts up, it takes away my audio from here, and I have to restart it.
Yep.
But I
You
think
might
it's valid.
have to disable the audio device.
So
Yeah.
my question is, does his interpretation of the creation story in the Bible, is that literal for him, or is that just something that's symbolical, or perhaps just something different than other than how it reads? Because when Gospel, he presented that these stars are within the firmament. How far does the firmament stretch? So these are questions I'm curious as to
and personally,
so is that literal for him?
Well, I certainly couldn't answer that question. How thick the firmament is? I have no idea.
Well, that's what I'm saying.
There's only one piece of scripture that's in Job. I forget exactly where. That even, and it might be a result of the translation into English. I don't know what it actually says, but I do know the translation is literally the only reference to the shape of the earth. Now, it doesn't say the shape of the earth is, but it's the only one that in its context has the word shape of the earth. And it says that the earth is it is shaped like clay under a seal. Now
we have to be careful with that.
If you come, okay, go ahead.
Sorry, I was just going to say that we have to be careful that we're getting the word earth in context as well, because sometimes it means the ground, just the ground, so that the ground takes shape, as in, even after the flood or whatever, that the ground would be stamped out looking, right, with contour, flat but with contour. So I wouldn't use that as a proof text. It's just what I'm saying.
I'm not talking about the firmament. I'm talking about the earth.
Right, and that's the statement about the earth. The earth takes shape like clay under the seal,
That's why I'm bringing it up.
Right,
I was almost finished. I'm sorry.
Sorry, go ahead.
Confused. I'm trying to.
Well, I'm just saying that sometimes the focus needs to be on the word earth there, because sometimes. I'm sorry.
No, the Q. Oh well, Q? that'll actually be at 63rd in Lexington. This is 63rd.
Oh, you're talking to somebody else.
Yeah. Sorry about that. Okay, so yeah, it's not that way. I'll tell you that. 63rd is right there. Right there. Look, I'm pointing right across the street, right there where the Q and the F is. All right. Anyway, my bad. Okay, back to the point. Okay. So I'm saying that the only reference, if English is the proper translation, it references the shape of the earth. Now, it's the only place that it actually says the earth takes shape like clay under a seal. Now, what I was going to say is, if you think about that in the context of him saying that he sees the circle of the earth, there's only one way you can take away from that, because the circle is clearly not a sphere, and the earth taking shape like clay under a sphere, under a seal, wouldn't be a sphere either. Right. So that kind of rules that option in my opinion.
Well, I'm just saying that's what they're going to point to, is they would say, well, it could mean the ground only. I'm just saying what they would use as a counterclaim. But
I'm only talking about the ground. I don't get it.
I know, but that's what they'll say. That's just all the point I was trying to make, is that what they'll say. But we have a preponderance of evidence in the Bible for everything else. There's something like 200 references or something like that people have listed that talk about earth shape in the Bible in one way or another. But as far as circle and ball, people don't realize there's two references in Isaiah. One is that they, talks about the circle of the earth, that they say, well, it's anything round. We'll use, even the dictionary, the Bible dictionary will say round as a kind of a compromise, because it's vague on purpose. But in that same book of Isaiah, it says that in a judgment against Israel, I will roll you up and throw you like a ball. So they had a word for ball. Isaiah had a word for ball, and he didn't use it when he said the circle of the earth. So,
can somebody draw a picture of a footstool for me?
For your information, Danny has muted him or deafened himself, so he's not longer.
Okay,
I know that.
He must have something else to do. But
can anybody draw a footstool for me?
They're ball shaped, right?
Matthew, how about you? Can you draw a footstool for me?
So there's the footstool. There's the firmament being stamped out. There's the seal under a clay kind of circle that you get. I don't know how. Sure.
I'm sorry. On firmament, the Hebrew word is rakia. The Greek word is stereoma, and in every instance that one of those words is talked about, it talks about something strong and hammered out like metal. It doesn't mean it's made of metal, but it's something that is very strong. And since we have statements after the flood in the Psalms about the waters above the heavens, then that means that there's still a firmament holding those waters up. And I did along with a couple other people about a year ago, did an examination of William Lane Craig's statements on flat Earth, because he did a rather mocking interview, which was not in keeping with his usual standards of logic. But we pointed out that he made the ridiculous statement saying, well, what? Does the sun, moon, and stars, is this hard, solid thing that rolls around, and how could it be structurally strong enough when it doesn't have pillars in the middle, and blah, blah, blah. And I was just like, wow, are we saying that God doesn't have a quote-unquote technology to build a firmament that keeps the waters above from the waters below, just like the Bible literally says?
Or
those are the kind of, yeah, go ahead.
You have submersibles that go pretty deep into the ocean, and they use glass. I mean, so it's just not, and that's pressure. It's holding out. So that's a completely different thing. I mean, when you think of what out there might be. So,
I mean, even the word rakia means an extended surface.
Like I said, either one of those words in every context they're used are talking about some. I mean, there's a direct one that says strong and hammered out as metal.
Right. And then there's which in other words, expanse, which you try to use as expansion, which is a little bit different. And expand is typically land or sea, representing a wide continuous surface. So
it's insane that because I happen to be watching pastors talk about the flat earth this morning. And one of the arguments, they just keep going back to the circle of the earth thing. Is there anything else that they have? Because that's literally the only shape, because a circle is a circle and a sphere is a sphere. Those are two different shapes, actually. And so when they go to the circle, it's like, yeah, but then you go to where it references what the earth is like when they say it's shaped like. And so it's like, if that's the only reference they have is round, why are they holding on so strong? What else is there that they talk about?
They also use that it hangs upon nothing to say it's in space.
Yeah, and I would answer to that it also doesn't sit on any. That doesn't mean it doesn't sit on something. It just means it doesn't hang from something. We could play that game with them, the semantic game with them, if they want. But I was going to say something else. I totally lost it. So I'll jump in when I think of it.
Yeah, I just wanted to make a general public service announcement that for the people listening, this is obviously in the context of those people who are adhering to these words of the Bible. So just for anybody that's getting, the heebie-jeebies or the hair is standing up because we're talking about the Bible, it's for the sake of those that are adhering to it and exposing contradictory held beliefs, aka cognitive dissonance. That's the purpose, just so everybody is aware. But anyway, I tried to address what was going on in regards to him talking about the stars and bring it back down to earth and help him understand why that was necessary, explaining that his presuppositions about what he thought the implications of flat earth was actually not the case. And this tends to be the catalyst for why people wind up getting banned, is because they're over here having their thoughts about what they think something is, and then it just devolves into chaos, basically. There's probably a better way to put this. Maybe somebody is understanding what I'm trying to say. People are going down a path of argument. It's an incorrect path based on assumptions. And people, instead of addressing the assumptions, get kind of lost in the weeds. And then everybody thinks that they won. And in reality, only one person might have won, but one person definitely didn't walk away with more understanding. They walked away with confusion.
I thought of what I wanted to say earlier.
Okay, cool.
Just understanding where any young Earth creationist organization is coming from is, as I've said, I think I said last time I talked to him, that young Earth creationists have long been smeared with being flat earthers because of saying, "Oh, you think the Earth is round? You also think it's flat, don't you? Ha ha ha!" And use that as a smear tactic. And so now that flat Earth is a thing, they're just going to dig in their heels against it because of that history and the baggage, and that they've always been attacked as being unscientific. And so they don't want to go anywhere near flat Earth they don't want to be ridiculed. And that's what a lot of the resistance is about. And that's why it was so important for us to define science as you were doing when I first came in, and we have to keep that in context as well, because I understand there's even what I consider a ridiculous term, library science. I mean, okay, it's a body of knowledge. You're using it as that part of the semantic range. I don't have a problem with that. What I do have a problem with is when somebody says we're doing hard, empirical, observable science, and yet using the fallacies and the assumptions. So that's what, the point I was hoping to bring up again, and I didn't think of it in time while he was still here listening. So, sorry, that's all I had to say on that.
Yeah, and we definitely got barely through that topic of defining science. We had a conversation about it, but it really didn't. It didn't go very far. And I certainly am not. Science and scientific study is not my expertise. I understand the basics. Logic is certainly more my passion. Philology.
Yeah, and I think he kind of conceded, if I heard him right, that in the end it's all going to be based on philosophical assumptions. The whole debate, as far as neither side can convince the other on the basis of pure science alone. It can't be done. And so yet we have the advantage in that ours does not require esoteric knowledge, and it doesn't require great complexity. We have the Occam's razor position.
Yeah.
I mean, even when it has to do with the heavenly bodies, like practically the way we utilize them is with the usefulness of a plane, the plane that we live on. Like the only reason I could think it's a celestial sphere because as things move away from you in any direction, it's going to be lower in your field of view until it reaches the convergent point in which you can't see. That's gonna if you plot that out, it could appear as if it was a sphere. I don't know.
Well, here's I guess what makes it really difficult for me. I was suggesting that the reason we see the stars, for instance, do what they do is because of something to do with the stars and where they are and how they are up there. And he made it out to sound like that was a crazy assertion, whereas his assertion is that the reason the stars are doing what they're doing is because of something about the ground. And the reason that we know that the ground is doing something is because of what the stars are doing. And I'm the one that's made to look like a crazy person in his eyes, even though he cannot see the circular reasoning of, or maybe not, cannot is maybe not the right word, has not demonstrated awareness of the circular reasoning that he's using. Did anybody else catch that in the conversation about, I'm merely saying we look at the stars, they do what they do, and you're adding this thing about the ground, and my question is why, and your justification is the stars? Is anybody?
I can see this particular reasoning, and to be honest with you, like from a third-party perspective, right? Say I'm being objective. Here's the thing: from your standpoint, you're taking one assumption, which is the assumption we don't know what the heavenly bodies are doing, right? But we assume that they're doing something over what we've measured as a flat Earth. He's making the initial assumption, Earth globe, and then also making a similar assumption about the heavenly bodies because there's no empirical evidence as to distance, makeup, whether they are physical in the position that they are. You know what I'm saying? You're taking the Occam's razor approach. We measure the surface as flat and stationary, right? And as to the claims of the heavenly bodies, we're not 100% sure.
Yeah. Well,
and that's why they always want to deflect away from the surface, because the surface measures flat and we experience it as stationary. So they have to go to the sky.
Yeah.
Yeah, I found it funny is maybe a too strong of a word, but he said that flat earthers were it was a mantra, right? Looking at the surface, flat earthers are using a mantra, and then all he did was looking at the sky. And even when you pulled him back to the surface, he went up to the sky again. So who's doing the mantra now? It's just ridiculously doublespeak.
They're trying to delegitimize any meaningful conversation, any kind of conversation that a person thinks that they should have with a flat earther. People are out there trying to make it seem like that's not possible, that there's no need, there's no reason, you shouldn't engage with us. Here's the reason why. Their thoughts are so outlandish. There's no reason to even think about the things that they're bringing up. You know, they literally said that we cannot detect curvature from the Earth's surface. Like that's literally the opposite of their claim, not my claim, not their claim. And he's going to say that that's not possible. While the only direct evidence we would have is predicated on the geometry of the Earth that we can see from the Earth. That's crazy.
Yeah. Still, my question was never answered. As to whether the story in Genesis, is that for him literal or figurative or symbolical, something like that. You know, because
he kind of answered it, but before you were here, I think.
So what did he say?
It's up to interpretation, right? So a more direct answer to that question would be figurative. And that, yeah, and that's what happens.
If it's open to interpretation, then that's definitely your position. Then it's figurative, because anyone can interpret it however they like.
Yeah. So if you were a dog owner, like you owned a pet dog, and your only justification for the fact that your pet is a dog is that cats exist.
But here's another thing.
And all you ever did was talk about cats in order to prove that you had a dog.
But if he's a Christian, so-called Christian, he understands that spiritual things are spiritually discerned, right? So you cannot jump ship.
Did we lose you mid-sentence?
He can't hop on the bandwagon of atheists and adopt their beliefs and then therefore transport those over to theology, right? Yeah. So now you implanted these ideas that are meant to remove God from the equation and therefore supplant them into the theory that the belief in a creator. So how does that work? I mean, logically, I mean, you would never put parts from a boat in a car, you know. It's just like,
that is why I started the conversation out.
There's got to be some parts of the boat that can go in a car.
Yes, that's why
you know what I mean. You know what I mean.
with the mystery school religions and the origins of these things, trying to establish his position on different fields like quantum quantum physics or whatever, and their origins in the mystery school religions. I was trying to establish his awareness of those sorts of things, and I don't think that he's as aware of the subject as I am, if at all, in regards to the mystery school religions. I don't know. Here's the thing: some people are anti-conspiracy theorists. They don't want to believe in conspiracies of any kind, even though there seems to be this historical theme of a specific and general. There's a good word for this that's just escaping my mind. A repeated pattern of deception and conspiring against the creator over and over and over again throughout all of history, and a concept of anthropocentric soteriology, leading people to believe that they can be their own saviors, be their own deities, become one with the universe, and reach a state of apotheosis. And that seems to be the common stream of deception from the beginning of time, at least according to the book I believe in. It started with the first people, and it's continued on till now. And even if you're a rejecter of that book, you could still identify this thing that I'm referring to as a thing that is persistent throughout history. At least in the last, 5,000 years? About 5,000 years, you can see a consistent theme of that same theme repeated over and over and over again. To neglect that or ignore that, to me, is egregious, especially if you believe in that book.
So can we conclude that although I enjoyed the conversation with Paula, that when we wanted some actually evidence, he just stopped talking, said, well, I'm not going to talk about that?
Yeah, I mean, there was
I found that interesting. Yeah, now he's all of a sudden silent.
A coincidental ceasing of the conversation when it was actually getting addressed to discuss actual evidence on the earth and not in the stars. Yes.
And how happy he was when Paula said, well, you don't deny parallax. Wow, you're the first one. Wow. I hope I find more flat earthers that don't deny it, right? How happy he was.
Well, it's kind of meaningless, but it's exciting for him because he thinks it means something. But it's all based on assumptions.
That's why I say
frustrating.
That that's why I say we should we have to have conversations with more people. That's all we can do at this point. And when you reach a person like that, you gotta remember what your intention is for speaking with that person, or you gotta figure out what their intent is, and you can do that by asking them, hey, what do you hope to get out of this conversation? What would you actually like to know from me? Things like this, because then you can gather from then what position you should take and how you should be disseminating the information. So, I mean, if he says, I'm not willing to talk about certain things, that thing being actually the claim that's made, if you don't want to actually look at the evidence or the lack thereof, unfortunately, there's nothing else you can do for that person. You just shake their hand, say, have a good one, and they're going to stay in that paradigm. That's what they want. They're telling you in no uncertain terms, this is what I'm doing. This is what I'm willing to do. This is what I'm not willing to do. We've seen a little bit of that from Paza yesterday.
Which part? A good thing, or more of the same?
Well, Paza initially said he was going to go away to look at, the math because it might have been contrived, and if that's the case, then he has a totally. He might come away with a different take than he initially did, and he would reconsider. And so I asked him yesterday. I was like, it's been about 3 weeks. Have you looked into it? He's like, not really. And then, we got down to the conversation again, and at some point he said, I've always said, and it's always been my position, that any evidence you would be trying to obtain from the horizon is inconclusive. Therefore, I don't see a reason to ever talk about it, because you can't get a conclusive answer. So you're not looking into the math then. So you're not doing what you claim that you set out to do. That's fine. But at the end of the day, I'm a flat earther because I'm not delusional. I know that there's a claim of a geometric horizon. He understood that. You know that if the Earth is curving away from you, there's a portion of it that you can see and a portion of it that you can't. There's supposed to be a measure as to how much, using the formula 1.2 times the square root of the observer's height in feet. The problem is that using that formula doesn't give you the distance to the distance in which you would be able to see no more land, because that's geometrically curving away from you. So to say that, well, we can't determine that, well, then the claim is not. Ultimately, you're saying, yeah, there is no geometric horizon.
Here's the claim at its base level, Elijah. Here's the claim. My claim is unfalsifiable because I want it to be unfalsifiable. Therefore, all of your efforts to try to falsify my claim will be dismissed on account of it being axiomatically unfalsifiable. End of story. And I say this to them, and you know what they say? Nothing. They don't go, oh, that's not true. I mean, true, you could falsify it. If you could falsify it, I would allow you. No, they go, well, yeah, basically.
He did basically do that. He acted like he was thinking about it, trying to bumble through it, but in the end, we came to the conclusion that, it's unfalsifiable.
Okay, so unfalsifiable isn't the right word. What is falsifiably forbidden? Forbidden falsifiability. There you go. That's the phrase. Forbidden falsifiability. Dogmatically forbidden falsifiability. DFF. And I challenge any of them to prove me wrong. But I have found that they are dogmatically clinging to their held beliefs without any opportunity of falsifiability. So it's forbidden, which is antithetical to science. Irony much? Dogmatically, I'm writing this out. False. Forbidden. Falsifiability. Anybody want to white knight and come to their rescue about what I've come to conclude about these certain people that they are dogmatically forbidding forbidding falsifiability?
I mean, it is what it is. I mean, I'd like you to ask Matthew the same thing you asked Positive, because that would be 2 on the record.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's an applicable question. Another way to ask the question, especially for new people, would be, are you interested to learn how and why the ball has been falsified? How? Maybe just how. Maybe how's the right one. Are you interested to learn how the ball has been falsified? Simple as that question. And then if they say, no, I'd like to teach you about why it is, the conversation's over. Pointless.
Yeah, pretty much.
So yeah, I was in Florida, and I walked on the surface and I looked up the sky and I saw a star, and was at the other place, and the star was at the other place. So Earth is a ball.
That was exactly where that was going, 100%. It could not have been this way because it couldn't. And I even provided the relevant, rational explanation, and it got shot down as ad hoc, without any irony, without any awareness of the irony of accusing. Talk about the pot calling the kettle black.
Well, how? I mean, how? Okay, I guess you have to explain to me how. What
He
you
said
did
that
was
my
ad hoc.
explanation
Maybe
was
I
ad hoc.
missed it. Yeah, because
So
with the there's the sky. Things are moving about above you. What I guess I did hear you ask him, how does that necessitate you being on a ball? I guess that was your question. And then that's what he said. You had an ad hoc. How? Why?
My alleged ad hoc is, what if the firmament is making things appear that way because the firmament does that, and he claimed that was ad hoc.
Well, appear what way?
Adjusting the parallax, the positional where it appears, all of that. Like, so it's my understanding that the firmament is not a flat surface. It could be, but I don't think that is the case. That doesn't seem to make any sense. What does seem to make sense is that the
I'm a flat topper, but go on.
Well, yeah, I just think that in order to see certain things from different areas, you're going to have some type of distortion.
If I might jump in on that one, because in his MC Toon interview, he held up at one point a circle, a flat, like a large piece of cardboard in a circle, and then showed that if you viewed it from the bottom, held it up above your head and viewed it and moved it away from you, it would appear, everything on the cardboard would appear elliptical, then that it's moving in an elliptical fashion, and things, any circle in the sky would become an ellipse. And I agree, it would. So that's what happens if you make the firmament flat. You run into that problem where there should be an elliptical distortion at the extremities that we don't see. But my answer to that would have been, which is another thing I forgot to bring up to him, is that we don't say that the firmament is flat. So that's an argument that it's a straw man, actually.
But here's the main point. Him saying that explanation is ad hoc, or maybe he said post hoc. I can't remember. Whatever he said, it's deeply ironic because the globe is incorporated into his argument.
That's what I kept trying to say about parallax. If we use the term parallax, we're already assuming that we're moving and something that we're looking at is not, which isn't even true in their paradigm, because the stars and everything is allegedly moving all the time at great speed, and everything that makes everything have to be relative. And so he's saying that, well, with all these complex motions and all sorts of directions and speeds, that we can somehow use parallax to determine the distance to something we see in the sky. It doesn't make any sense, logically or scientifically. Sorry. Let me find my
now that time it was very appropriate. When you say it doesn't make sense and your cuckoo clock goes off, that is comedic timing.
Yeah, but you see what I'm saying? Why we don't have a flat firmament, and why even the term parallax is begging the question fallacy, because it's assuming, quite hilariously, if I may, that in spite of all these complex relative motions, we can somehow use parallax. Parallax only works when you're moving and the thing you're looking at is not moving. So by invoking parallax, you have to say everything in the sky is not moving.
Yeah. I'm offended by ignorant hypocrisy. I don't know why I should really continually lower my expectations of people, but
yeah,
I keep on thinking that people should be able to recognize.
Well, I'm not as I can't look inside somebody's head, but this guy was the guy who said, I have all the answers for flat earthers. I haven't met a flat earther which I couldn't answer, right? So
yeah, I mean,
that's fine. The issue, and I can understand why somebody would think that. The issue is the blindness, the blindness to your own assumptions, and why you think that your assumptions are axiomatic facts. They aren't. They're the thing in question.
He wrote a book about flat Earth, so he knows. He knows.
Imagine being in the courtroom and pretending that your innocence is axiomatic as the justification for your innocence.
Right.
Yeah, that's what it's akin to. And it's awkward. It's like, no. Your innocence in this analogy is in question. So you can't use your innocence as the axiom. It doesn't work that way. In similar fashion to this argument, whatever, what do you call it? Claim. Yeah. Claim is what you call it.
But how can somebody write a book about flat Earth and then not be able to see his own assumptions? I mean, that doesn't fit in my head, right? Doesn't 45 years of doctor astronomy, he writes books about flat Earth. I mean,
because he's believing his assumptions are axioms for reality, ignoring the fact that they're assumptions, refusing to acknowledge that they're assumptions.
Right. It's just like what I mentioned with William Lane Craig when his ridiculous statements about the firmament, what it must be if it's really a firmament, a thing, and that it has to have these engineering qualities and these, considerations for bearing load. I mean, all of that from a Christian who believes that Jesus rose from the dead, but doesn't believe that God can make a firmament in a way that people can't understand. That we haven't been told the details. We're only told that it's strong and it holds up the waters.
And terrible.
And so why is this such a stretch to say that this somehow can't be done because we can't conceive of the engineering of the firmament, that's just ridiculous. It's such blindness, especially from someone of his caliber, like I said, who his claim to fame is defeating atheism, and he's known for his logical arguments and for people refusing to debate him because he's so good at it. But on this topic, out of his area of expertise, that's just, all of the rules went out the window.
So you can believe that we were created by God, like actually created. We didn't evolve; we were created. But when it comes to the complexity of the sky, that's just like unfathomable. Meanwhile, you have a belief in second. Listen, you gas will always fill the available volume. You have stars that are in this nuclear process, which would never take place with just gas particles in a vacuum. That would never come about. How is it harder to think that the Bible is that things are how it's described in the Word versus the thing that they say that we have to believe in that actually goes against how we experience reality here at the surface of the earth?
The great embarrassment of syncretism. That's what it is. And it's a complex, I can explain what I mean by that, but the felt need amongst certain people, certain Christians, or whatever, the felt need to syncretize with pagan mystery schools of Babylon ideologies that have been passed down for thousands of years. They don't fully realize that, but that is the fact. Their desire to syncretize with that is a great embarrassment, and it is the cause of all of these types of inconsistencies. They were duped, and it's embarrassing. But it's not the first time. Sorry.
Go ahead.
I mean, there was a man that went up on a mountain, and meanwhile, folks threw together their jewelry and freaking made a cow to dance around, to do all sorts of things around this golden cow, while their leader was off, out of the picture temporarily. I mean, people have been embarrassing themselves despite all rationale, despite just completely in the face and opposition to true reality. People have been opposing reality.
Is that moment right there that really, if I had never found a better a better context to use, that was a weird flex. What they decided to do while Moses is up top speaking to the Father, that was. Why are you doing that?
And well, this question may be really uncomfortable for some people. I tend to be a golden calf slayer for people exposing their golden calves. But the fact of the matter is, this is a human behavior that is repeated over and over and over again. And you can pretend that you don't have a golden calf. Now, there may be a reality in that you truly do not have a golden calf. But if you do have one, you're more than likely pretending you don't, if you do have one. And if you've identified your golden calves and allowed them to be recognized for what they truly are, fake, man-made, then you grow up. And you truly grow up. I mean, identifying the things that you used to think were the things that defined And that's what these Mystery School of Babylon teachings are. They are the foundational teachings that make people think that which is, again, apotheosis, able to become one with the universe, to be like God, this original lie. Oh, but I really like that lie. I mean, it feels so good. And I wish it were true, because, I mean, wouldn't it be awesome? It would, if it were true. It would be really awesome. Oh, I want it to be true. Well, that's between you and your creator.
And I think I've heard a little pushback on whether the approach you and I have been using with someone like Dr. Faulkner is not good because we're angry and not being lied about, and that these people are spreading what we consider lies, by any objective measure are lies, and that the solution is to destroy with a direct frontal assault. And I disagree with that, that objection, because if our goal is truly to convince people of the truth, we're not going to beat them over the head. This has been a criticism of a lot of Christian evangelists, which is rightly deserved, because they want to browbeat someone into a relationship with God, and that doesn't work. Well, if we have another truth of the shape of the earth, the way to do it is to convince people, not to attack people. And especially with Christians and Danny Faulkner, appealing to what we have in common first, which is the Bible as authority, which is why earlier on I posted links on the Bible and science that I've written up, because the point is, for knowing who we're talking to and knowing what the common ground is, I can appeal to that as an authority and say, this is what science is what the Bible says, this is the problems that are, the set of problems that are created when someone wants to believe science above all, what they consider science. And what we've been trying to do here is say, no, that isn't science, it's assumptions, it's begging the question, it's not seeing the holes in your own, argument and projecting them on others. And that's what we're trying to present. But I think it's overall the best strategy is to be firm but polite. I think that would win many more people over to listening, at least, even if we don't ever convince them, we've at least got them to listen. And that's the first step.
Matthew's here now.
Have to be.
So I can ask
Matthew.
you,
But really
Matthew.
quick, before that,
okay,
I think that's really important, Paula, because when you see the extreme of what you just said, it's just someone being kind, being careful, and being patient. That's the extreme of what you're suggesting, while the extreme of the other position is something like I hate to bring it up now, but I know Gospel Bearer, you said you like young Moses, and I do too. However, I do not. I would like it if he did what he did without the browbeating, and it gets real. Anyway, the point is, like, that's the extreme, and the reason that that's not the best tact is literally because the average person is being marketed to, and what they're being marketed is the idea that we're irrational, illogical, and chomping at the bit. So yeah, that's all I wanted to say.
I think our tactics have been counterproductive in many cases overall, and there's a lot of things I can't share, and pass around because it's vulgar or because it's unduly aggressive. And I do think there's a balance that takes practice to get to between being firm and even, pressing someone for, put them on the hot seat. That can be done while also being polite. I think those two are not mutually exclusive, but not everybody can do that. Not everybody wants to try it. Like I said, it takes practice, and it takes, I think a lot of times getting stuff out of your system first, like I did, 20 years ago, talking to atheists or whoever it was about whatever. You spend time in the trenches and you refine your argument. But once you got it refined, there's no need to be like that anymore. There's no need for the mud wrestling, because it's not a good place for you mentally anyway, in the first place, because to live in that kind of anger and aggression and fight or flight is not healthy for anybody to live there. I don't say I never go there. I mean, you guys heard me. I don't know if you were here like months ago when I got on. They were talking about women, and I was just like, I'm going to smash somebody in the teeth, right? And that's something that any of us can lapse into, but it's not a place to live, is what I'm saying.
All right, Matthew.
Yes, go ahead.
Can you provide an example of which would satisfy falsifiability of what you believe to be true regarding Earth?
Yeah, I think that if we could use some special equipment to see 2,000 miles or like infrared or something like that, if you could somehow do some sight line 2,000 miles, that would falsify my idea.
So 2,000 miles from what elevation?
Any elevation, actually. So how about like below 100 kilometers?
So what is that, 60 miles?
Yeah. If you could go up 60 miles and see 2,000 miles.
So like the one that is posted here by Martoth of 2,800 miles?
Yeah, that would falsify. That would do it.
Okay. So why that number in particular?
Oh, I just picked it. I mean, 2,000 miles is pretty far over the curve.
Yeah, but here's what's peculiar. Peculiar is not the right word. It is, but it isn't. Colloquially, it is. By definition, it is not. It's this arbitrariness of picking a number. Let me put it this way. I'll just be direct. I don't believe you. And I don't mean that in a confrontational way. I mean it in the reason I don't believe you is because why isn't 2 miles from a 12-inch height? Why isn't 2 miles enough? Why? Okay, so 1 + 1 is 2. If there was, let's say we were like re-evaluating math, hypothetically, this is just not real, but hypothetically, if you were redoing the whole math, the process of how to do math, blah, 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 and the claim was 2, but you did this math in a different way and you got 3.
No, I see where you're going with this. Yeah,
the point I'm making is like any falsification should be adequate, not... I don't understand an arbitrary... So, for instance, the 1.22 miles, why is it 4 miles good enough? Why is it 10 miles good enough? Why is it 20 miles? Why does it have to be something else besides falsification? Why does it have to be an arbitrary qualifier for the falsification?
Because at smaller numbers, the margin of error is so big that it would overwhelm any calculations we might do. But if you go to several thousand miles, 2,000 miles, it seems like the margin of error due to the atmosphere, lensing, and whatever should be overcome by the distance.
Okay, so
what margin of error would you accept? I just wanted to
hold on, Elijah. So here's this is why I don't believe you. Okay, because I think of it in terms of ratios, right? So you're saying that the margin of error would overwhelm it. The issue I take with that is this is a rule of ratio, in that if it's 1.2, but in reality it's more like 10 or 20 or 30 or 50 or 70, okay, from 12 inches, the ratio there, a 10-to-1 ratio or a 20-to-1 ratio. Well, if you were at 100 kilometers, as you suggested, and you did see 2,000, or let's keep it to kilometers. That video said the kilometers. You're at 100 kilometers, but you see 4,500 kilometers. That's a 45 to 1 ratio. Okay, so in regards to ratios, if you were at the 12-inch and you could somehow verify that 45 miles could be seen from 12 inches, then it stands to reason that you've accomplished the same thing. Am I wrong?
No, that's a good way of explaining it. Yeah, I think you're right that it is ratios rather than raw distances.
Okay, so a ratio of 45 to 1, why 45 to 1 ratio? Hypothetically, initially you said 2,000, so maybe we're talking about 40 to 1. Why is a 40 to 1 ratio necessary? Why isn't a 3 to 1 ratio absurdly plausible or sufficient? Why is a 3 to 1 ratio not profoundly sufficient?
Yeah, you're right. It was just sort of arbitrary that I picked that number.
Okay, but this is a 10 to 1 ratio.
It could be infinite. It wouldn't change my view because I think that light can curve at the same distance.
Okay, so now you're backpedaling and saying that 2,000 miles would not be sufficient because it could curve infinitely.
Yeah, once you put it that way, you're right. I retract that and say even if we saw 2,000 miles, I wouldn't believe it.
This goes back to my original question. Are you dogmatically forbidding falsifiability?
No, but I'm trying to think of what would be falsifiable. I think you're right. I think what you've shown me is that even if I saw no matter what distance, that wouldn't count for me as falsifiable. So I take your point.
Okay, so I could make a statement. Okay. This is the dilemma that I see. I would make the statement, which not everybody's going to agree or believe it to be true or whatever, but I'm just going to make the statement as a statement. Only God sits above the circle of the earth and sees the whole thing all at once. What it seems to me is that someone like you wants to only allow the falsifiability to be as if you sit upon the throne of God, and only then would you actually realize and or believe that it is what it is. And here's why I find that hypocritical. You didn't apply the same level of scrutiny or justification for the other belief that is in contradiction to our observations. You didn't require God to tell you that it was a ball in order for you to believe that it's a ball. You believed liars, known liars that have been passing down a lying narrative for thousands of years. You believed and trusted them because numbers, because credentials, because authority. But in order to falsify those liars, you're requiring something on the level of God or God himself to falsify it and nothing else. Do you understand the disconnect?
Yes, I do understand what you're saying. And I'd have to think about what would count for me as falsifiability. I haven't sort of come up with a good answer to your question there. Yeah, obviously, if God himself came and said something, I'd have to believe it. But then I might even doubt that it was actually God speaking to me. If Jesus Christ appeared and said, "Hey, look, the earth is flat," I'd say, I'm not sure that this is Jesus standing in front of me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I do think that you and I will agree on this eventually in eternity. We'll know the answer.
Yeah, I agree that there will be no room for any sort of disagreement regarding that which is truth. Now, I have no idea about subjective things like whether or not blueberry or apple pie is better. I don't know about subjective things, but in regards to truth, yes, I would full-heartedly agree.
Can I just interject?
You mentioned. I was trying to. I don't know if you guys heard me before, but
No,
well, you spoke to the one point about. Well, I guess you're right. It's a good point. I have to think about what would be falsifiable, but to the point that you didn't give the same level of scrutiny to the other belief. What about that? Can you speak to that?
Sure. It's I look at all of the different evidence and see which story sounds the best, and I go with that one. And it's more like looking at evidence and trying to match that with.
No, have you given the same amount of scrutiny? Wow, to heliocentrism, or the sky is a vacuum and we live on a globe with water and air adjacent to the vacuum, and the sun, the thing that allows for life as far as we know, is this composition that we have not tested or confirmed, and also happens to be a violation of the second law of thermodynamics. Like, have you given the same amount of scrutiny to that heliocentrism in that context with space and the vacuum of space and all of this? Have you?
Yes, I have, and the answers that have been provided to me make sense to me. So I find those criticisms to not have force. So, for example, the second law of thermodynamics does not get violated just by a vacuum.
Well, did you? I was just speaking about Flat Earth Boxer, and he actually spoke to a cosmologist because two physicists were asked the question of how do you have gas pressure adjacent to a container, adjacent to a vacuum, and his only answer was gravity, in which the guy said, well, you have a shoebox and the air is inside and there's a vacuum outside. You poke a hole, the air immediately escapes. And the cosmologist says, yeah, you're absolutely right. You're absolutely right. Yep. He says, so why then doesn't the air on the earth just go into space? He's like, well, because of gravity. He's like, but you put the shoebox with air pressure on the floor and you pop it on the floor and the air escapes.
Yeah, because gravity doesn't have that much of an effect. It has enough effect, but not much.
No, but it's supposedly the reason that the gas isn't going into the available volume. So now you have this gas and you have this available volume, but underneath that you have the earth, the thing that's said to be holding the air that you're breathing, but it can't hold air pressure other than the air that we're breathing. If you were to pressurize anything else, it's not going to sustain that pressure in the way that we believe that our pressure is being sustained by the force of gravity. Don't you find that problematic, especially because the cosmologist didn't have a response after that?
No, I don't find it problematic. I think it's perfectly explainable with the proper understanding of gravity, physics, and the second law.
What is proper understanding of gravity?
Well, I actually disagree with that. I'm gonna end it. Yeah, I know. It's getting too far. I'm gonna end it right here, because gas particles they're not attracted to each other. Period, and they're not attracted to the Earth either. That's observable. I'm not even gonna pull the citation. Anyway.
Danny, are you back?
My time.
Because I have a quick question for you if you're back, Danny. I just saw you undeafened yourself, so that's why I'm asking. I think that this is a relevant question, and I don't know how you can make any progress whatsoever if there's a dogmatic forbidding of falsifiability.
I guess he's not listening, but I had a question for Matthew, since you're the math professor and you referenced gravity and physics. I'm just the dummy here, so maybe explain it to me. But when I look into particle physics, the only quote-unquote known forces of the known forces, the only one that's not accounted for in the standard model of particle physics is gravity. So maybe if you know how gravity is applied to gas particles, if you have some sort of citation, I'd be willing to look at it. But
so yeah, you're absolutely right. The standard model, as far as I understand it, I'm no physicist either, but they don't have a good explanation of where gravity comes from. They still use some equations to describe how gravity works without understanding where it comes from. But all physicists would say that gas particles are attracted to the Earth.
Well, when it comes to particle physics, they don't account for gravity at all whatsoever. It's not taken into account within the equations. Now, physicists can use gravity for certain things, right? But when it comes to particle physics, gravity is not accounted for.
But if
would you
gravity doesn't,
particles?
I don't know that it's not accounted for. You may be right. It is much, much weaker than all the other forces, so maybe they can ignore that effect. I don't know.
Well, it's not that it's not accounted for, but I mean specifically, there are citations that specifically say gas particles, because people wonder if gas particles lose energy and slow down. So, as a response to any inquiry of that, what you will find is that gas particles don't slow down, or gas particles aren't attracted to each other. If they were, they would slow down. So what we do know is that gases aren't affected by gravity.
I would dispute that. I don't.
Not experimentally. Not experimentally. There's no way to prove that. Is there? I understand why you disagree, because you have a worldview, and I understand that you would have to disagree because of what you believe the sun is, and what you believe Jupiter is, what you believe any of the other stars are. So that necessitates you thinking opposite. But is there any justification experimentally for your disagreement?
I don't know.
Okay, fair enough. I fall back. I think Gospel Bearer kind of wanted to. I think we kind of got off the road that Gospel Bearer was on, and I liked it. So
Are you sure that you don't know?
Yeah, I'm not familiar with all those experiments. He asked for.
But because they are not experiments. We know, all of us, that there is no, and you know also, Matthew, there is no any kind of experiment. But you are saying I don't know. It means that somebody make experiment, but you don't know.
He was asking for a citation, and I don't have one.
No, he asked for.
Not even asking for a citation. I understand what you believe. I obviously say that it's a second law of thermodynamics violation. By necessity of the model that you believe in, you would have to say, no, that's incorrect. But off of what grounds? Because particle physics, and then, gas laws and all of that, and then our experience with gases here on the surface. How do you justify your belief or your assertions experimentally? And if you say I don't know, that is something I'm willing to accept at this point.
Well, it's in this ratio. If you need to see 2,000 miles or 2,000 kilometers to believe to be flat, how much I need to see drop to believe that Earth is a globe?
I don't know. It seems like any drop would make you question whether it's flat or not.
Yeah, but Matthew, isn't that somebody showing you flatness, and there is not a drop? I would like to see any drop: 60 feet, 130 feet, 256 feet, 1,000 feet, whatever. I don't want 10,000 to 2 miles curvature. I don't need that. Like you need 2 miles flatness, you know. I need only 66 feet, for example, of drop. That will be enough for me to believe in globe.
How about a drop that hides half of a mountain? Would that make you question?
How about? I didn't hear you.
How about a drop that hides half of Mount Rainier?
Yeah, there's a problem, right? Because there's a difference between a measurable drop, because we know that the Earth curve is geometrically obstructing the Earth curve being the horizon, because there's equivocation going on most of the time when the horizon is brought up. In the heliocentric understanding, the junction where the sky and the ground meet is where the ground drops off. So therefore, the rest of the ground is at an angle that's impossible for you to see because it's angled away from your field of vision. It's obstructed by the curvature and the geometry of the Earth. The other option is that it's optical, and that is subject to perspective and the angle at which you view things. So in the case of the mountain, could be that it was just some optical effect, but I know for a fact you're not going to be prepared to pull an observation and say this is measurably the geometry of the Earth getting in the way of this mountain, because we've gotten RC boats that do the same thing. Well, why is the RC boat, in which case is not enough distance for there to be curvature, people say?
There's not water in front of the mountain. I mean, there is water in front, but the thing that's directly in front of that mountain is the hills with the trees.
In the top picture, though, what
I know,
it looks like there's water blocking my view of the bottom half of the mountain.
No, it doesn't at all. It's bumpy, obviously, matching the profile of the hills that are in front of that mountain, and a 5-foot-tall person can stand in front of a mountain and completely block the entire mountain, depending on where they're positioned. Okay, so again, that's not water that's directly in front of that mountain. That's the hill with the trees. It's bumpy.
Gospel, how much distance is between beach and mountain? Shore and mountain, let's say.
Yeah, quite a bit. I don't know how much. Quite a bit.
Isn't there a curvature?
Anyway, the point.
This is important. There is a mountain. We measure that mountain. Reference to. Oh, what? Okay. Sorry.
I was just trying to address his claim that it was water. I was just, one thing at a time. Do you understand that it's not water that's directly blocking the mountain, that it's actually the land blocking the mountain?
No, I disagree, but we can disagree.
No.
Yeah, that's definitely the mountain.
Not allowed to disagree. Here, I'll repost. Look. See what I posted? Matthew?
Yes, I see it.
That's not water.
Okay.
that's land.
Yeah, that's most definitely land. I'm zoomed into this thing, and it's.
But this is all a big nothing burger because number one, even so, that's still not a distance in which he doesn't think that there's some explanation for it.
But when you're addressing what somebody believes to be the thing, they're believing it one way, but you can expose the error in their thinking. That's all I'm trying to do here. And Matthew, do you understand the error that you made? Do you understand that is not water, that's land?
I see what you're saying. It looks like land, yes.
It can't even be, well, yes, a very beautiful point, but also he can't claim that that's
that wasn't
water.
A full concession, though.
But okay, fine. Well, we'll give that.
I wish it was a full concession. Because it doesn't. Okay.
It looks okay. I can see that it looks like it could be land and hills in front of that mountain instead of water.
It's obvious, and if you look up the definition of obvious, it's not. It cannot be water. Now, the light blue line be in front of that is quite obviously, or appears to be water. Maybe it's not as obvious, but it's a light blue line, and I would deduce that is water because it makes sense that would be water. But the profile of everything else is so evidently land, and a profile of land, that to suggest that it's water is painful to me. For you to not go, yeah, okay, I was wrong, but I still believe what I believe. That's fine.
Yeah, I was wrong. I still believe what I believe.
Okay, that's fine.
I think maybe a better. There would be times where you could get a picture of Mount Rainier where there's only water in front of it, but this doesn't seem to be a good example of that.
I can imagine all sorts of things.